If these words found you right now, stop scrolling. Close the other tabs. Let the noise fall away for a moment, because this is not just another spiritual message meant to comfort you while your old life collapses and your new one still refuses to appear. This is a direct transmission for the one standing in between timelines, for the one who knows something has ended but cannot yet name what is beginning. And if your chest tightened when you heard that, the Arcturians want you to know this space is not empty. It is where they have been trying to reach you. And here is what most people do not understand about this space you are in. You are not stuck. You are not failing. And you are not losing your way. You are standing at a threshold that very few people know how to name while they are inside it. Because when an old life ends on the inside, before the new life has fully arrived on the outside, it can feel like something is wrong with you. It can feel like your signal has gone quiet, like your motivation has disappeared, like the version of you that used to know how to move, decide, perform, and keep everything together has suddenly gone offline. But this is not collapse. This is transition. This is not emptiness. This is the sacred space between identities, and the Arcturians want you to know that what you have been calling confusion may actually be the moment your soul began withdrawing energy from a timeline you can no longer live inside. Maybe that is why things that once felt normal now feel strangely distant. Maybe that is why your own life has started to feel unfamiliar in your hands. Or maybe that is why you wake up feeling like you are standing just outside yourself, watching an old version continue to dissolve. That is not weakness. That is not instability. That is not you becoming broken. That is you crossing a frequency threshold. And here is why this feels so disorienting. The human mind wants a clean bridge. It wants one chapter to end and the next one to begin immediately. It wants certainty. It wants labels. It wants proof that the discomfort will lead somewhere real. But spiritual transition rarely moves that way. It often removes clarity before it reveals direction. It often takes the old structure apart before it lets the new codes land in your body. So if you have been feeling suspended, displaced, out of rhythm, or unable to fully return to the person you used to be, listen carefully. This is not a meaningless pause. This is a withdrawal of identity. This is the moment where your field is being cleared of patterns, roles, and attachments that cannot cross into your next timeline. And yes, that can feel lonely. It can feel like floating in a room with no walls. It can feel like nothing fits anymore, but nothing new has fully claimed you yet. You may even wonder why you cannot just go back, why you cannot force yourself to care about what used to drive you, why your spirit resists what your mind keeps trying to rebuild. But here is the thing. You cannot return to a frequency your soul has already outgrown. And that in-between feeling, that strange internal distance, that sensation that your old life has already ended, even while the outer details still look familiar, is not you being lost. It is you being released. Released from the timeline that trained you to survive. Released from the identity that kept you approved. Released from the rhythm that taught you how to function, but not how to fully embody truth. The Arcturians are showing me that many of you in this space have been ashamed of how hard it has been to explain what you feel. Because from the outside, it may not look dramatic enough to justify the depth of your inner shift. And yet inside, something enormous is happening. Inside, your consciousness is separating from an old architecture. Inside, your body knows you are no longer meant to build your future from the same emotional blueprint. That is why the silence feels louder. That is why the waiting feels charged. That is why even rest can feel intense. Because this is not ordinary waiting. It is energetic recalibration. And here is what matters most right now. Do not interpret this threshold through the eyes of your old self. The old self will call it stagnation because it cannot control it. The old self will call it failure because it cannot measure it. The old self will call it emptiness because it does not yet recognize the new frequency gathering around you. But your soul knows. Your body knows first. Your breath changes for a reason. Your chest tightens or opens for a reason. That strange sense that you are no longer fully available for the life you used to live is not random. It is not anxiety by itself. It is not restlessness for no reason. It is recalibration. It is preparation. It is the sacred disassembly that happens before a deeper embodiment can begin. So if no one has been able to name this for you, let this be the name. You are in between lives, not between bodies, between identities, between timelines, between the self that got you here and the self that will be able to carry what is coming next. And you are not late. You are not broken. You are not drifting without purpose. You are in the chamber of transformation. And once you understand that, everything begins to change. Maybe lately you have noticed that the things that used to hold you together no longer reach you in the same way. The work that once gave you structure feels strangely hollow. The goals that once kept you moving now feel like echoes from someone else's mind. The routines are still there. The people may still be there. The life may still look familiar from the outside. And yet something inside it has gone silent. Maybe you have tried to be grateful for what you already have. Maybe you have told yourself not to be dramatic. Maybe you have wondered why you cannot just relax back into the life you worked so hard to build. But here is what the Arcturians want you to know. This is not ingratitude. You are not rejecting your old life because you are spoiled, unstable, or impossible to satisfy. You are feeling the truth that your frequency has already moved beyond what once fit you, and that changes everything. Maybe you have noticed that conversations you used to enjoy now leave you tired. Not because the people are bad, not because you suddenly do not care, but because something in you can no longer stay nourished by exchanges that do not meet your spirit where it now lives. Maybe you have noticed that certain places feel heavier than they used to. Rooms, groups, obligations, even familiar environments may feel energetically crowded now, as if your body is reacting before your mind can explain why. You walk in and your chest contracts. Your breathing shifts. Your nervous system starts whispering, "This is no longer for you." And maybe the strangest part is this: nothing may look wrong enough on paper to justify what you feel. That is one of the first signs. When the old timeline is losing its hold, the misalignment often appears before the evidence does. Maybe you sit down to do what you have always done, and your energy will not follow. Maybe you try to care about what used to matter, and the connection just is not there. Maybe your motivation has not disappeared completely. It has simply stopped flowing toward what no longer belongs to your next embodiment. And this is why forcing yourself has become so exhausting. You are not lazy. You are not blocked in the way you think. You are not broken. Your soul is no longer investing life force into expired structures. And here is what happens when that begins. The old rewards stop feeling rewarding. The old roles stop feeling natural. The old version of success starts to feel strangely empty. Even if it once made perfect sense to you, you may still be able to perform it, but you cannot inhabit it the same way. Maybe you have felt this in your relationships too. People you once felt deeply bonded to now feel harder to reach. Not always because they changed. Sometimes because you did. Sometimes because the bond was built around a version of you that is dissolving. A version that needed to shrink, please, prove, rescue, adapt, or stay understandable. And when that version begins to fall away, even love can feel different. Not false, not meaningless, just no longer aligned in the same form. Listen carefully. This is one of the clearest signs that you are in between lives. The structures around you have not fully disappeared, but they are no longer animated by the same current. The job may still exist, the relationship may still exist, the routine may still exist, but the energy that once made them feel alive inside you is withdrawing. That is not random. That is not a mood swing. That is not spiritual confusion for its own sake. That is your field outgrowing its container. Maybe you even feel guilty for this. Guilty that what once felt meaningful now feels heavy. Guilty that you cannot return the same enthusiasm. Guilty that part of you wants silence more than stimulation, truth more than comfort, space more than closeness. But here is the thing. Your soul will always disturb what your ego would have settled for. And the Arcturians want you to know that this loss of resonance is not the end of your capacity to love life. It is the end of your ability to pretend alignment where alignment no longer exists. That is a sacred difference. Maybe you have been calling it numbness. Maybe you have been calling it detachment. Maybe you have even feared that you are becoming cold. But this is not coldness. It is discernment awakening at a deeper level. It is your consciousness refusing to keep bonding with forms that cannot hold your next frequency. This is why the old life feels flatter now. This is why what used to excite you no longer reaches your core. This is why your spirit keeps pulling away from what your mind still tries to protect. And here is what most people miss. When your soul no longer belongs to the old version of you, the old structures begin to lose their emotional gravity. Not because they were worthless, but because they completed their function. They brought you this far. They cannot carry you further. So if everything that once fit now feels strangely lifeless, let this bring you peace. You are not ungrateful for the old life. You have outgrown it. And that is the first sign the new timeline is already closer than it appears. And here is the second sign. Your body begins to understand what your mind is still trying to deny. Long before you can explain this threshold with words, your system starts responding to it, quietly at first, then all at once. Maybe lately your chest has felt heavy for no clear reason, not always pain, not always fear. Just pressure, weight, a strange fullness when you are near certain people, certain places, certain decisions, as if your heart is no longer willing to stay neutral where your soul feels misaligned. Maybe your forehead has felt tight, your temples, the space between your brows, as if something is pressing from the inside, asking you to see differently, asking you to stop translating everything through logic alone. And maybe you have tried to explain it away. Stress, lack of sleep, too much thinking. But here is what the Arcturians want you to know. Your body is not betraying you. Your body is going ahead of you. Maybe your sleep has changed. You are tired but not able to fully rest. And you wake in the middle of the night as if something called your name from another layer of awareness. Or you sleep deeply, but your dreams become thicker, stranger, more symbolic, more charged. As if your subconscious is receiving transmissions, your waking mind is not yet ready to decode. This is not random. This is not your system malfunctioning without meaning. This is recalibration. Maybe you have noticed a tingling down your spine for no obvious reason. Maybe your breathing changes around certain conversations. Maybe your stomach tightens before your mind can form a thought. Maybe your whole nervous system feels more open, more alert, more permeable than it used to. Sounds hit harder. Energies linger longer. A room can exhaust you before a single word is spoken. And here is what most people misunderstand about this stage. Or they think these responses mean something is wrong. They assume sensitivity means fragility. They interpret internal intensity as emotional instability. But the Arcturians are showing something different. When your frequency begins detaching from an old timeline, the body often notices first. Because the body is not just biological. It is energetic. It is intuitive. It is responsive to truth before the intellect catches up. So if you have felt restless without a clear story, if your body has been refusing certain spaces, resisting certain people, tensing around choices that used to seem acceptable, listen carefully. That is not you becoming difficult. That is discernment moving through the nervous system. Maybe lately you walk into a space and instantly feel drained. Maybe you speak to someone and your chest contracts even while your mouth keeps smiling. Maybe you are around old environments and feel a subtle buzzing under your skin, as if your whole system is saying, I cannot anchor here the way I used to. That matters. Because one of the clearest signs that you are in between lives is this: your body stops cooperating with what your soul has already outgrown. And that can feel frightening when you do not have language for it. It can make you question yourself. It can make you wonder whether you are imagining things, whether you are becoming too sensitive, whether you need to push through and be more normal, more grounded, more reasonable. But here's the thing, your body is not asking you to become more numb. It is asking you to become more honest. The heaviness in your chest is information. And the pressure in your forehead is information. The sudden fatigue, the restless sleep, the vivid dreams, the strange pull to isolate, the sense that your nervous system is always listening for something just beyond the visible world, all of it is information. And not all of that information is fear. Sometimes it is recognition. Sometimes your body is reacting because it can feel the split between where you are and where you are meant to go. Sometimes it is not anxiety. It is your system refusing to be fully available for a frequency that no longer matches your becoming. This is why symptoms often intensify around transition, not because you are failing the process, because you are in it. Your body is learning a new rhythm. Your energy is reorganizing. Your inner signal is becoming more precise. And precision can feel intense before it feels peaceful. Maybe that is why you cannot tolerate noise the way you used to, why certain foods, conversations, obligations, or environments suddenly feel louder in your system, why your spirit wants more silence, more space, more water, more breathing room, less performance, less false brightness, less forcing. That is not withdrawal for no reason. That is your organism trying to hear itself clearly, and the Arcturians want you to understand this with compassion. You do not need to fear every sensation. You do not need to make your body wrong for speaking in a language your mind has not fully learned yet. The body knows first. The body scans truth. The body reads coherence and distortion faster than thought ever could. So if you have been waiting for external proof that this transformation is real, begin here. Begin with what your body has already been telling you. Begin with what tightens you. Begin with what opens you. Begin with the places where your breath changes. Begin with the truth that your system is no longer willing to lie for your comfort. This is not a breakdown. This is your inner technology recalibrating for the life that is trying to reach you. The Arcturians have a name for the space you are moving through right now. They call it the dismantling of the old timeline. And this matters because once something has a true name, it stops feeling like chaos and starts revealing its pattern. What you have been experiencing is not just emotional drift. It is not just a strange season. It is not just burnout, confusion, or a lack of direction. It is the loosening of energetic anchors that once kept you bound to a version of reality your soul can no longer inhabit. And here is what they want you to understand. A timeline does not end only when a job ends, or a relationship ends, or a physical location changes. Sometimes a timeline ends in the invisible first. It ends when your consciousness can no longer consent to the identity that sustained it. It ends when your inner frequency stops feeding the structure, even if the structure still appears intact from the outside. That is why this phase feels so difficult to explain. The old life may not be fully gone. The new life may not be fully visible. And yet you can feel that something irreversible has already happened. This is the dismantling. This is the moment the old architecture begins losing coherence in your field. The Arcturians are showing this as a kind of unhooking, like threads being gently removed, like cords being loosened, like anchors being lifted from the bottom of an ocean you did not realize had been holding you in place for years. And once those anchors begin to rise, you feel it. Not always as relief at first, sometimes as floating, sometimes as disorientation, sometimes as if gravity itself has changed. But that does not mean you are in a void. You are not in blank space. You are in the soul's transfer chamber. And here is what most people misunderstand about this chamber. They think the new life should appear the moment the old one stops working. They think clarity should arrive immediately. Then they think the next identity should be ready to wear as soon as the previous one begins to dissolve. But that is not how deeper transformation works. The old identity must lose form before the new one can reveal its true shape. And that in-between period is not a mistake in the process. It is part of the design. Because if the new timeline arrived too quickly, you would try to enter it with the same nervous system, the same attachments, the same reflexes, the same survival patterns, and the same self-concept that belonged to the old reality. You would carry expired codes into a space that requires a different embodiment. So the dismantling comes first. The release comes first. The unmaking comes first. This is why delay is not always delay. Sometimes delay is protection. Sometimes delay is recalibration. And sometimes delay is the intelligence of your soul refusing to let you step into the future while still dressed in the past. Maybe that is why the new path feels near, but not fully formed. Maybe that is why you sense something coming, but cannot yet define it. Maybe that is why the old life keeps fading in emotional color, but the next one has not become concrete enough for the mind to trust. This is not punishment. It is preparation. It is sacred sequencing. The Arcturians want you to know that this dismantling phase is not passive. Even if it looks quiet from the outside, profound work is happening underneath the visible surface. Your field is being reorganized. Your attachments are being sorted. Your perception is being refined. Or the self that was built for survival is being loosened so the self built for alignment can begin to emerge. And that emergence cannot be rushed. Because this is not a costume change. This is a consciousness shift. This is a timeline release. This is the clearing of inner architecture so a new reality can land without distortion. So if you have been asking why it feels like your old world is dissolving before the new one has arrived, let this be the answer. You are not being abandoned in the middle. You are being restructured there. The old identity is not falling apart because you failed to hold it together. It is falling apart because it completed its assignment. And what is coming next needs more truth than that identity could carry. So breathe into this. Let the words settle deeper than the mind. You are not lost between worlds. You are not drifting without design. You are in the dismantling of the old timeline. You are in the sacred interval between who you had to be and who you are now becoming. And even if you cannot see the full outline yet, the process itself is proof that something real is already underway. And here is why this phase hurts as deeply as it does. It is not only because you do not know what comes next. It is because something in you is dying that once knew exactly how to survive. Not your soul, not your essence, not the truth of who you are. What is dying is the identity that carried you through the old timeline. And that kind of death can feel invisible to everyone except the one living through it. Maybe it is the version of you that needed to be understood in order to feel safe. Maybe it is the version that learned how to earn love by overgiving. Maybe it is the one who stayed hyper-aware, hyper-capable, hyper-available because being needed once felt safer than being free. Maybe it is the self that kept performing strength, kept choosing approval, kept staying agreeable because that was how you learned to remain connected. And when those layers begin to fall away, grief comes with them. Not because those versions were false, because they were expensive. They protected you. They helped you endure. They taught you how to stay alive inside realities that did not fully nourish your soul. So when they begin to dissolve, you may feel sadness without a clear event to point to. You may feel waves of grief with no obvious story. You may cry over nothing, and yet it is not nothing. You are mourning identities that once held your world together. This is not collapse. This is shedding. This is not you losing yourself. This is you losing what is no longer yourself. And the Arcturians want you to hear that very clearly, because many of you have been judging your pain too quickly. You tell yourself that you should be stronger, that you should be more grateful, that because nothing dramatic has happened on the outside, the ache inside must be exaggerated, irrational, or self-created. But here's the thing. A soul-level death does not always come with visible wreckage. Sometimes the deepest endings happen in silence. Sometimes what is ending is a pattern, a role, a mask, a coping structure, a way of earning worth, a way of staying chosen, a way of making yourself smaller so the world would let you belong. And when that dies, it hurts. It hurts because it was familiar. It hurts because it was practiced. It hurts because even what wounded you can feel painful to release when it once made you feel protected. Maybe what is dying is the rescuer in you, the part that knew how to hold everyone else together while quietly abandoning itself. Maybe what is dying is the achiever, the one who turned productivity into identity. Maybe it is the peacemaker, the shapeshifter, the loyal self that kept saying yes when your body meant no. Maybe it is the self that built a whole life around avoiding rejection, and now can no longer live that way without feeling its own spirit start to fade. That is not punishment. It was preparation. All of it was calibrating your frequency to bring you to the moment where you could no longer confuse survival with alignment. And yes, that realization can break your heart open, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you feel the cost of being who you had to be, something inside you begins asking for truth with a force that comfort can no longer silence. This is why loneliness can become so sharp in this season, not because you are being abandoned, but because you are moving out of resonance with the old signal. The people, places, and patterns that once matched the identity you wore may no longer know how to meet the truth that is emerging, and that can feel like being left behind. But listen carefully. You are not being left behind. You are leaving an old frequency. There is a difference. The isolation you feel is not always rejection. Sometimes it is the quiet that comes when the old wave can no longer hold you. Sometimes it is the sacred distance that appears before soul family. Deeper alignment and truer connection can reach you. Sometimes it is the emptying out that must happen before a more honest life can enter. So if you have been grieving without knowing exactly what you are grieving, let this be your answer. You are grieving the death of identities that carried you to this threshold. You are grieving the self who knew how to survive, but not yet how to fully receive. You are grieving the old architecture of belonging. And that grief is holy. Let it move. Let it soften you. Let it show you what can no longer come forward with you. Because this is not the end of you. It is the end of every shape that was built from fear, approval, performance, and protection. And what remains after that is not emptiness. It is truth. And this is where the transition becomes impossible to ignore. Because once your frequency begins changing, everything around you starts responding to that change. Relationships, work, spaces, routines. Even places that once felt neutral begin revealing whether they can still hold the truth of who you are becoming. Maybe you have noticed that certain relationships now feel tighter, heavier, more confusing than they used to. Not always because someone did something wrong, not always because there was a dramatic betrayal. Sometimes it is subtler than that. Sometimes the connection starts straining because it was built around an older version of you. And that version is no longer available in the same way. Maybe you can still show up. Maybe you can still speak the language. Maybe you can still play the role. But your energy no longer settles there. And that matters. Because when you are in between lives, the old agreements begin surfacing. The places where you abandoned yourself for peace. The places where you stayed understandable to remain loved. The places where you made yourself smaller so you would not disrupt the system around you. What once felt normal now begins to feel costly. That is not drama. That is revelation. Maybe your work has started feeling like this too. Not just tiring, not just stressful, constricting. As if every task asks you to compress your spirit into a shape that no longer fits. When as if the version of you that could once perform that role without question has stepped back, and now every day inside that structure feels louder, tighter, more unnatural. And here is what the Arcturians want you to know. This does not always mean you must immediately burn everything down, but it does mean something real is being shown to you. The misalignment is becoming visible. The old containers are no longer hiding what they cost you to maintain. And that is part of the test. Because this threshold is not only about receiving a new timeline, it is also about seeing clearly what no longer belongs in it. Maybe that is why doors feel like they are closing, why certain people pull away, why opportunities lose their energy, why the places you once leaned on now feel like they are resisting you. But listen carefully. Not every closing is a loss. Not every ending is rejection. Not every disruption is wrong. Sometimes a door closes because your soul can no longer shrink enough to walk through it. Sometimes a relationship becomes strained because the bond depended on your old self staying asleep. Sometimes work becomes unbearable because your spirit is done trading truth for familiarity. And here is where most people turn back. They feel the discomfort. They see the tension. They notice the old structures no longer fit. And instead of reading that as guidance, they interpret it as danger. So they return to the familiar. They choose approval over alignment. They choose comfort over truth. They choose the old rhythm, not because it is right, but because it is known. But the Arcturians are showing that this is a choice point, a real one. Because once the misalignment becomes clear, you are no longer only being asked what you want. You are being asked what you will continue tolerating. You are being shown exactly where you still cling to old safety, old identity, old permission structures. Life itself begins reflecting back the places where you are still trying to remain loyal to what is already expired. That is why everything can feel like a test in this season. The relationship tests whether you will betray your truth to avoid disappointing someone. The job tests whether you will keep calling depletion stability. The environment tests whether you will keep forcing your body to adapt to what it no longer trusts. The familiar tests whether you still believe known pain is safer than unknown alignment. This is not punishment. It is precision. It is the old timeline revealing its seams so you can no longer confuse attachment with destiny. Maybe that is why some conversations feel sharper now, why certain energies feel almost unbearable, why your tolerance for distortion has become so low. It is not that you suddenly became impossible. It is that your field is becoming more honest. And honesty changes what you can remain inside. So if your outer world feels unstable, if relationships feel different, if work feels too small, if places that once comforted you now make your system contract, do not rush to call it failure. Do not assume the shaking means you are making a mistake. It may mean you are finally reading reality at the correct frequency. And here is what will test you most. Whether you will interpret the loss of comfort as a sign to go backward, or whether you will recognize it as evidence that you are no longer built for the old life. Because familiar is not always aligned, safe is not always true, and the next timeline will not be entered by loyalty to what merely used to fit. So breathe when the old structures tremble. Breathe when things stop making sense in the old way. Breathe when the life around you starts revealing where you are still split between comfort and truth. You are not being destroyed by these tests. You are being shown with extraordinary precision what can come with you and what cannot. And this is what the Arcturians most want you to understand about the in-between. It is not empty. It is not wasted. And it is not a dead zone where nothing is happening. It is a recalibration chamber. It is a sacred slowing where your soul is clearing noise, releasing roles, refining perception, and expanding your capacity to hold what could not fully arrive before. Maybe it feels like nothing is moving because the movement is happening underneath the visible layer. Maybe it feels like delay because the outer world has not caught up to the inner shift. Maybe it feels like you are being held back because your mind is measuring progress by old standards that no longer apply to the life that is forming. But here is the thing. You are not being delayed. You are being tuned. You are not falling behind. You are being recalibrated. You are not wasting time. You are becoming someone who can carry a different frequency without collapsing back into old patterns. And that matters more than speed. The Arcturians are showing this phase like a tree beneath the soil. Before anything rises, the roots must change direction. Before new growth becomes visible, the structure underneath must reach toward deeper water. And if you judge the tree only by what was happening above ground, you would call it stillness. You would call it absence. You would call it nothing. But the deeper intelligence would know better. It is preparing. It is strengthening. It is choosing where it will draw life from next. This is what is happening in you. The space you have called confusion may actually be refinement. The silence may be clearing. The loneliness may be separation from noise. The pause may be protection from entering your next chapter, with old distortions still attached to your field. Because the Arcturians want you to know something very clearly. If this transition moved faster, you would bring the old frequency with you. While you would carry the same people-pleasing, the same urgency, the same fear of being misunderstood, the same need for external confirmation, the same reflex to abandon your inner knowing the moment it made life less convenient. So the pace slows, not to frustrate you, to free you, not to punish you, to prepare you, not to make you prove yourself, to make sure what enters next can actually remain. This is why the in-between can feel so strange. It is stripping away what is too loud, too false, too practiced, too borrowed. It is asking your nervous system to stop reaching for noise as proof that life is happening. It is teaching you to recognize subtler signals, a breath that opens, a place that feels lighter, a conversation that does not drain you, a pull that does not come from panic, but from quiet certainty. That is recalibration. And here is what most people miss. The in-between is not only removing what no longer fits, it is increasing what you can hold. More truth, more clarity, more integrity, more stillness, more direct contact with your own inner signal, more capacity to stay aligned even when certainty has not arrived yet. That is why this phase can feel both empty and intense at the same time, because something is being built in invisible ways. Your discernment is sharpening. Your sensitivity is becoming cleaner. Your intuition is becoming less contaminated by fear. Your body is learning the difference between urgency and guidance. Your spirit is learning that peace and numbness are not the same thing. Your field is learning how to choose resonance over repetition. This is not a minor adjustment. This is frequency work. And the Arcturians want you to release the idea that only visible progress counts. The call did not stop because things became quiet. The mission did not disappear because you cannot define it yet. The path did not close because you are no longer able to force what once moved easily. Sometimes the most powerful movement in your life will happen in a season where nothing looks impressive from the outside, but everything is changing underneath. So if you have been judging this chapter harshly, soften now. If you have been calling this stagnation, listen again. If you have been afraid that you are doing something wrong because life feels slower, emptier, or less certain than before, let this settle deeper than the mind. The slowing is intelligent. The silence is active. The stripping is sacred. You are not standing nowhere. Well, you are in the place where your soul is adjusting your inner architecture so the next timeline does not become another repetition of the old one. You are being taught how to hold more without betraying yourself, how to receive more without shrinking, how to move forward without dragging old survival patterns into the future. So breathe. Even this is movement. Even this is becoming. Even this strange and quiet threshold is doing exactly what it was designed to do. You are not being left in the middle. You are being made ready there. And now the Arcturians want to name who you actually are inside this transition, because you were never meant to leave this threshold with the same self-concept that brought you into it. The old identity had to loosen not only so your life could change, but so you could finally see yourself correctly. You are not someone who failed to fit into the world. You are someone who was never designed to belong to distorted structures for too long. You are not too sensitive. You are not too intense. You are not too different. You are not too hard to understand. You were designed to register what others ignore. You were designed to feel what is misaligned before it becomes visible. You were designed to notice the frequency beneath the form. And that is not a flaw. That is function. The Arcturians call souls like this frequency anchors, beings who do not only move through life reacting to what is already here, but who help stabilize what is trying to arrive next. People who feel the friction early, people who outgrow environments before the evidence becomes obvious, people whose bodies, hearts, or an inner knowing begin responding to a new timeline before the outer world has language for it. That is why your path has felt so strange at times, because you were never built to live comfortably inside what your soul knows is false. Maybe all your life you were told that your sensitivity was a problem, that you felt too much, needed too much space, took in too much energy, asked questions other people did not ask, needed truth where others were content with performance, needed depth where others were content with roles, needed resonance where others were satisfied with routine. But listen carefully. Your sensitivity is not the obstacle. Your sensitivity is the instrument. It is how you read coherence. It is how you detect distortion. It is how you know when something has life in it and when something is only being maintained out of habit, fear, or approval. You are not wired wrong. You are wired differently on purpose. And here is why this matters so much right now. If you still interpret your nature through the eyes of the old world, you will keep misnaming your gifts as problems. You will call discernment anxiety. You will call depth heaviness. You will call your inability to fake alignment dysfunction. You will call your soul's refusal to shrink immaturity or instability. But the Arcturians want you to stop doing that. Because the one who cannot go back to the old life is not broken. The one who cannot comfortably numb themselves into old patterns is not failing. The one who feels out of place inside false timelines is not weak. That one is ready. You are not here to perfectly fit into systems that require self-abandonment. You are not here to become more comfortable with misalignment. You are not here to become easier to contain. You are here to hold a clearer frequency. You are here to become a stable signal for a more truthful life. And that is why so much in you has been recalibrating. Not so you can become less of yourself, but so you can become more precise in who you actually are, more honest, more coherent, more able to remain inside your own signal, even when the world around you has not fully caught up yet. Maybe that is why you have always felt slightly ahead of the environments you were in, why certain relationships began feeling thin before anyone else noticed, why certain paths started feeling complete before the outer result was obvious, why your spirit would not let you keep settling once the deeper truth became visible. That was not self-sabotage. That was signal integrity, and the Arcturians want you to understand something else. Frequency anchors often mistake their own calling for personal failure because they spend years trying to measure themselves by systems they were meant to outgrow. They wonder why ordinary forms of success feel so incomplete. They wonder why belonging feels conditional. They wonder why they cannot just relax into lives that look fine from the outside, because they are not here only to repeat what already exists. They are here to embody what is trying to emerge. That is you. You are not just leaving an old life. You are becoming someone who can hold a new one without collapsing into the old frequency. You are not just a sensitive soul. You are a soul with assignment. You are not just here to heal. You are here to embody. You are not just here to survive transitions. You are here to anchor a higher standard of truth inside them. So let this replace the old story. You are not too much for this world. You are too awake for the version of it that asked you to betray yourself. You are not behind. You are not disqualified. You are not wandering without purpose. You are a frequency anchor. You are one of the ones who feels the shift before it becomes visible. One of the ones who cannot unknow what the body has already read. One of the ones whose path requires more honesty than performance. One of the ones who cannot return to the old level once the soul has already moved ahead. And that quiet pride you feel hearing this is not ego, it is recognition. And now the Arcturians want to give you something gentle, not a rigid formula, not a checklist for controlling the unknown, but a way to move through this threshold without betraying what your body and spirit already know. First, stop demanding the full map. You do not need to know the entire next chapter to take the next aligned step. You do not need to force clarity before clarity is ready to arrive. And you do not need to panic just because the old way of making decisions no longer works the way it used to. This is important, because when the mind cannot see far ahead, it often tries to compensate by getting louder. It asks more people. It searches for more signs. It overanalyzes timing. It tries to predict every consequence. It wants certainty before movement. But the Arcturians want you to understand that what you need right now is not more mental pressure. You do not need more proof. You need less noise, less outside interference, less urgency, less forcing, less asking people who cannot feel what your soul is trying to show you. And here is what to do instead. Pause, not in defeat, in reverence. Pause long enough to hear what happens in your body when you stop trying to convince yourself. Pause long enough to notice what expands and what contracts. Pause long enough to tell the difference between a decision that comes from fear and a decision that comes from quiet inner coherence, because your body is already participating in the answer. Place your hand over your heart for a moment. Breathe more slowly than usual. Let your shoulders drop. Let the rush leave your field just enough for something subtler to be heard. Then bring one choice into your awareness. One person, one opportunity, one direction, one next move you keep circling. And ask nothing dramatic. Just this. Does my body open here or close? Does my breath deepen or tighten? Does my system feel clearer or more fragmented? This is not simplistic. This is sacred intelligence. The old self was trained to override these signals. The new self must learn to honor them. And the Arcturians want you to notice patterns, not because life is trying to confuse you, but because guidance often repeats itself softly before it becomes undeniable. A number that keeps appearing, a phrase that returns, a dream image that will not leave you, a place you keep feeling pulled toward, a truth you keep trying to dismiss. But it returns with the same quiet force. Pay attention to what repeats. Pay attention to what remains. Pay attention to what keeps finding you even after you try to move away from it. That is often how the next step begins, not as a complete answer, as a signal. And here is another instruction. Stop asking people to validate what your soul has already confirmed. If you already know something in the deep interior of your being, but you keep seeking permission from voices who are less connected to your path than you are, you will create distortion. You will delay what is already trying to become clear. This does not mean isolate from wisdom. It means stop handing your authority to noise. The Arcturians are not asking you to become reckless. They are asking you to become honest. Honest about what your body has been saying. Honest about what your life has been revealing. Honest about what no longer fits, even if it still looks reasonable from the outside. Honest about the truth that keeps returning in the silence. And here is what most people still misunderstand. You are not being asked to figure out your whole future. You are being asked to take the next step that matches your frequency now. That is enough. The next step is enough. The truthful conversation, the honest no, the pause before forcing, the deeper breath, the new boundary, the moment of not returning to what you already know is complete. That is movement. That is alignment. That is how the next timeline begins, anchoring in the present. So when you feel overwhelmed, return to what is simple. Water, silence, breath, rest, space. Write down what your body keeps saying. Notice what drains you immediately. Notice what gives you quiet energy. Notice where your nervous system softens. Notice where your spirit has to brace itself. This is guidance. Not every answer will come as a vision. Not every truth will arrive as certainty. Sometimes it arrives as a small opening, a little more breath, a little more peace, a little less resistance to being who you already are. Trust that. Trust the subtle signal more than the loud performance. Trust the repeated pull more than the passing panic. Trust the deeper knowing more than the voice that says you must explain everything before you move. And if you remember only one thing from this moment, let it be this. You do not need to force your way into the future. You need to become quiet enough to recognize where it is already opening. And now the Arcturians are showing something specific about timing. There is a choice point approaching for many of you within the next 3 to 6 months. Not a loud ending, not always a dramatic breakthrough, but a threshold moment, a subtle opening, a quiet turn that will carry far more power than it appears to hold when it first arrives. Listen carefully. It may not look like destiny when it comes. It may look like a conversation, an invitation, a sudden release, a new environment, a door you almost ignore because it does not arrive with enough spectacle for the mind to trust it. But the energy around it will feel different, not louder, truer. The Arcturians want you to understand that the next timeline often does not announce itself through chaos. It enters through resonance, through a moment that feels strangely simple, or but lands deep in the body. A decision that does not make total logical sense yet, but creates more breath. A person whose presence does not scramble you. A path that does not flatter your ego, but steadies your spirit. A letting go that feels painful for a moment, then immediately more honest. That is how the opening may come. Maybe it will arrive as something you finally stop chasing. Maybe it will arrive as something you finally say yes to. Maybe it will appear through a disruption that reveals what was never stable. Maybe it will come through one small act of self-honoring that changes the entire branch of your life. Do not underestimate small moments in this season, because this next threshold may not be built from one giant event. It may be built from one true response. And here is why this matters. Many of you have been expecting the new life to arrive in a form dramatic enough to remove all doubt. But that is not always how higher timelines open. Sometimes the higher path appears quietly because it is not trying to overpower your free will. It is waiting to see whether you can recognize truth without needing theater. That is part of the test. Can you feel what is right before it becomes obvious? Can you honor what opens before the outer world validates it? Can you choose resonance over appearance? Because the Arcturians are showing that when this moment comes, fear will try to speak at the same time. Fear will say it is too small, too uncertain, too early, too strange. Fear will ask for guarantees. It will try to drag you back toward what is familiar just because the familiar has shape. but shape is not the same as alignment. And this is where your discernment becomes sacred. The next doorway may not arrive wrapped in certainty. It may arrive wrapped in peace, in stillness, in an inner click that is easy to miss if you are still waiting for panic to guide you. The old life trained many of you to mistake intensity for truth, but the next timeline may feel calmer than your trauma expects. Do not overlook what feels quietly right. Do not dismiss what creates space in your chest. Do not turn away from the option that makes your nervous system less defensive just because it does not trigger the old adrenaline pattern. That calmer signal may be the opening. And here is another thing the Arcturians want you to know. This choice point is not only about what comes toward you, it is also about what you no longer agree to carry. In the next 3 to 6 months, many of you will be asked to stop feeding an old pattern, to stop over-explaining, to stop waiting for someone to become who they have already shown they are not, to stop offering life force to a role, place, or path that your soul has already finished with. That refusal is part of the new timeline too. Sometimes the opening is a yes. Sometimes it is a no. Sometimes it is a departure. Sometimes it is a deeper staying with yourself. But one way or another, a branch is forming. And once you feel it, you will know this moment matters more than it first appears to. So when the next few months begin shifting, do not rush to call the quiet moments insignificant. Watch what repeats. Watch what returns. Watch what becomes impossible to ignore. Watch what your body softens toward. Watch what drains power the moment you consider it. Watch what no longer lets you pretend. This is not a time to choose from fear, not fear of being alone, not fear of missing out, not fear of disappointing others, not fear of having no immediate plan. Choose from coherence. Choose from what deepens your signal. Choose from what makes you more honest. Choose from what your spirit can remain inside without shrinking. Because the Arcturians are showing a window opening, not forever, not to scare you, but to remind you that this threshold is alive. The in-between was never the end of movement. It was preparation for the moment where a quieter, truer path could finally present itself. And when it does, it may not feel like lightning. It may feel like recognition. And this is the part almost no one can choose for you. This is the test inside the threshold. And not whether you understand what is happening, not whether you can explain it beautifully, not whether you can sense the shift, but whether you will choose in alignment with what has already been revealed to you. Because being in between lives is not only a season of insight, it is a season of decision. And here is where it becomes real. You will be asked to choose between what is familiar and what is true, between what is approved and what is aligned, between the identity that once kept you safe and the embodiment that is now calling you forward. This is the place. This is the moment. This is what will test you. The Arcturians want you to understand that the old life does not only disappear on its own. Sometimes it waits to see whether you still desire it simply because it is known. Sometimes it remains close enough to return to, close enough to rationalize, close enough to make you wonder whether maybe you should just go back, soften your truth, shrink your standards, and step once more into the version of life that asks less of your courage. And that temptation can feel strong because the familiar has gravity, even when it hurts, even when it drains you, even when it requires self-betrayal. The familiar can still feel safer than the unknown simply because your nervous system has memorized it. But here is the thing. Memorized is not the same as meant for you. Comfort is not the same as alignment, and certainty is not the same as truth. This is why the choice point matters so much, because what is coming next will not be entered only by desire. It will be entered by honesty. Honesty about what your body already knows, or honesty about what your soul can no longer tolerate. Honesty about what you have outgrown, even if part of you still grieves it. Honesty about whether you are willing to release the life that fits your old identity in order to embody the one that matches your actual frequency now. That is the test. Not whether the new life is calling you, whether you are willing to answer it. Maybe the old path still offers a certain kind of reassurance, familiar people, familiar patterns, familiar pain, familiar roles that tell you who to be and how to belong. But the Arcturians are showing that for many of you, returning would not bring peace now. It would only bring numbness. It would only bring a quieter form of self-abandonment. It would only delay the moment when truth asks again, and even more clearly. Because once the soul has moved, pretending becomes more expensive. And here is where many people get confused. They think choosing alignment should feel easy if it is right. But often it does not feel easy at first. It feels cleaner. It feels quieter. It feels more honest. But it may still require loss. It may still require grief. It may still require you to disappoint the version of you that wanted life to stay predictable. So do not confuse challenge with misalignment. Sometimes the aligned path is the one that asks you to stop abandoning yourself. Sometimes the aligned path is the one that removes the illusion of safety. Sometimes the aligned path is the one that leaves you with no performance left, only truth. And that can feel like standing on the edge of a different life, with no guarantee except inner knowing. But listen carefully. Inner knowing is enough. When it has always been enough, you were simply trained not to trust it. This is why the choice before you is sacred. Because it is not only about career, relationship, place, or timing. It is about whether you will continue organizing your life around fear, or whether you will begin organizing it around coherence. Whether you will keep choosing what makes you explain yourself less, or whether you will choose what makes you abandon yourself less. That is a very different life. And the Arcturians want you to feel the weight of this without fear. Not because you are one wrong move away from losing everything, but because your soul has reached a level where casual dishonesty is no longer sustainable. You cannot unknow what has been shown to you. You cannot go back to sleep in the same way. You cannot keep calling misalignment your path just because it is familiar. This is the threshold of maturity. Not outer perfection, inner truth. Not waiting for the new life to rescue you, becoming honest enough to walk toward it. So when the moment comes, ask yourself only this. Does this choice return me to an identity that is already complete, or does it move me toward the life that is actually calling my name? Does it make me smaller or more coherent? Does it come from fear of loss or devotion to truth? Because you are not only waiting for a new life to arrive, you are being asked whether you are honest enough to enter it. Now let this become a moment of activation, not something you only understand with the mind, something you allow your body to receive. If you can, place your hand over your heart now. Let your shoulders soften, let your jaw unclench, and take a slow breath in through the nose. Hold it gently, then exhale without force. Again, a slower breath in, a softer breath out, and one more time. Let yourself arrive here fully. Because this was never just a video, this was a threshold. And if you are still here, then some part of you already knows that what has been ending inside you is real, and what is opening is real too. The Arcturians want you to feel this clearly now. You do not need to rush yourself across this passage. You do not need to prove that your transformation is happening. You do not need to explain to anyone why the old life no longer fits. You only need to stop resisting what your soul has already recognized. So keep your hand on your heart. Notice the warmth there. Notice the breath there. Notice whether something in you is becoming quieter now, not because all the questions are gone, but because the deeper part of you is no longer fighting the truth. This is the moment to release the old agreement, not with force, not with anger, with honesty. You are allowed to let go of the life that no longer belongs to your frequency. You are allowed to stop feeding identities that were built from fear. You are allowed to leave behind the roles that taught you how to survive, but never taught you how to fully live. You are allowed to trust that endings can be sacred even before new beginnings are fully visible. And here is what the Arcturians want you to know as you stand here. You are not late. You are not lost. You are not broken. You are not alone. You have been moving through a real threshold. You have been recalibrating for a real timeline. You have been guided even in the silence. And the fact that you are feeling this so deeply is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you are ready. So breathe again. And as you breathe, imagine the old life loosening its grip, the cords of obligation, the weight of outdated roles, the identities that kept asking you to shrink, the old timeline that taught you to stay in what hurt simply because it was familiar. See it gently releasing from your field now, not ripped away, not violently torn, simply unhooked. And as it releases, feel what remains. The truth in your chest, the signal in your body, the steadier part of you that has been waiting underneath all the fear. The self that does not need to perform to be real. Of the self that does not need the old world's permission to become what it came here to be. This is your frequency. This is your alignment. This is the beginning of your deeper embodiment. Now, if it feels right, say these words quietly to yourself, or speak them out loud. I release the life that no longer belongs to me. I release the identity that was built only to survive. I release the need to return to what my soul has already outgrown. I trust what is ending. I trust what is opening. I trust the wisdom of this threshold. I am ready to be led by truth, not fear. I am ready to recognize the new timeline as it arrives. I am ready to choose alignment over familiarity. I am ready to walk forward with the truth of my soul. Take another breath and let those words move deeper than thought. Where you do not have to know everything yet. You do not have to become everything tonight. You do not have to force the next chapter into form. The activation is not in controlling what comes next. The activation is in no longer arguing with what you already know. So let this be your closing agreement with yourself. I do not belong to the old life anymore. I do not need to go backward to feel safe. I do not need to betray my inner knowing to be loved. I am available for a truer life now. I am available for clearer guidance now. I am available for the timeline that matches my real frequency now. And if emotion rises, let it rise. If your chest feels warm, let it warm. If your eyes sting, let them. If your breath deepens, trust it. Your body knows, your field knows, your soul knows. And the Arcturians want to leave you with this. What is leaving was never the whole of you. What is coming does not need your panic. It needs your willingness. It needs your honesty. It needs your quiet yes. So rest your hand over your heart one last time. Breathe in and breathe out. You have not been forgotten in this in-between. You have not been abandoned in the dismantling. You have been accompanied through every unseen shift, every silent release, every moment that felt empty, but was actually preparing your field for what comes next. You were called here for a reason. You are moving through this for a reason, and you are ready. Not because you have every answer, because your soul has already begun to say yes. You are not alone. You are not lost, and the new timeline can find you now.